experimental kind of story coming at you today on Purple Heart Stories. Buckle up. Chapter 1. Uninvited Guest. Mike Walsh was 34 when an IED in Afghanistan jacked his eyesight and gave him the boot from the service. His wife, Emily, a 32-year-old ESL teacher, was slowly morphing from a loving spouse into a cranky caregiver. And now, 8 months after her husband's injury, she was playing hide the slummy with a Chinese dude named Chun. She was keeping this under wraps from her blind hubby until OL Gramps Frank barged into their already messed up life. Frank was a supposedly senile 73-year-old Vietnam vet, fresh outta the nursing home. Little did they know, except for Frank himself, that his old-timers was nothing but a military ruse honed in the tunnels of Da Nang. Outside, the September sun was throwing that late-day golden glow into the living room, which Mike Walsh couldn't see no more. He was parked in his favorite armchair, bought way back when, absently stroking the armrest. That chair remembered a different Mike, the one who'd come back from missions tanned and full of piss and vinegar, the one who could chill for hours watching sunsets over the Denver suburbs. Now his fingers, calloused from his time in the Special Forces, were just looking for a familiar anchor in a world gone pitch black. Emily was standing by the window, arms crossed, watching Miss Parker, the social worker, help the old guy outta the nursing home car. Great, she thought, another mouth to feed and watch after. Every move she made screamed exhaustion, not the kind you get from running a marathon, but the deep-down soul-tired that builds up drop by drop until it overflows. For 8 months, she'd been her husband's eyes, his guide dog, his rock. 8 months she'd put her life on hold, her dreams, her career. And now this. He's just a handful. Miss Parker's voice was apologetic, like she was talking about a naughty kid. The straw that broke the camel's back was last week. Mr. Frank rigged up a whole obstacle course in the West Wing. Clotheslines, cans full of rocks, tripwires. Mrs. Henderson, our oldest resident, broke her wrist. Frank, sitting in a wheelchair, suddenly perked up. His faded blue eyes seemed to look right through the walls of the house. "Charlie," he barked out of nowhere. "They're hiding in the walls. I can hear 'em skittering around." Emily flinched. Jesus, she thought, now we got 2 cripples in the house. One blind, one bonkers. Gramps was in Vietnam, Mike explained quietly, turning his head right toward the sound. He was a tunnel rat. Special units that. "I know what tunnel rats are," Emily snapped, sharper than she meant to. "I saw the documentary. They'd crawl into those Viet Cong tunnels. Half of 'em didn't come back out." Frank, who seemed deaf to their chat, started humming House of the Rising Sun to himself. His fingers, knobby with arthritis, or so it seemed, were tapping out a rhythm on the armrest. Miss Parker dug a stack of papers out of her briefcase. "You'll need to sign these guardianship forms. And here's a list of his meds, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, blood pressure meds." She hesitated. "He doesn't take 'em much. Says you can't trust anyone in the jungle." While Emily signed the forms, Mike tuned into the old man singing. Something was different about that gravelly voice, something hard to put your finger on. Like the old coot was singing not to himself, but to something unseen. In the rare moments that Frank visited before the injury, he never sang. Frank's beat-up army rucksack was dropped in the corner of the living room. Some rope, a beat-up compass, and a corner of a faded photo poked out of the pockets. Emily was eyeballing that rucksack like it was a ticking time bomb. In a way, it was. "Welcome to my last tunnel," Frank was thinking, gazing at the house through half-closed eyelids. "Only this time, the enemy ain't hiding underground. He'll come right to us, thinking he's untouchable." When Miss Parker finally skedaddled, a heavy quiet settled over the house. Emily robotically headed to the kitchen. Making dinner was the easiest way to dodge a convo. The sound of the microwave blowing up the silence, and Frank reacted in a heartbeat. "Air raid!" he yelled, his voice packed with real terror. "Mikey, take cover. They're bombing the perimeter." The old guy slid out of the wheelchair in one smooth move, too damn agile for a man his age and build. His hand shot out to his grandson, and in a blink, they were both under the heavy dining room table. "Gramps, what the—" Mike started, but Frank put a finger to his lips. "Shoo," he hissed. "They'll be back for a second run. They always do." And then something wild happened. Mike Walsh, a man who hadn't cracked a smile since that day in Afghanistan, started Logan. Not a crazy laugh, not a nervous one. The real kind of laugh that bubbles up from deep inside, washing away the bitterness and pain. Emily froze in the kitchen doorway, not knowing whether to cry or join in. She'd almost forgot what her husband's laugh sounded like. And now, this Looney Tunes old man. That night, when everyone was tucked in, Frank locked his bedroom door and laid out the contents of his rucksack methodically, like a soldier. His moves weren't those of a crazy geezer anymore. Every move was sharp and calculated, like a bomb tech defusing a mine. A stack of old photos, his platoon of tunnel rats, his wife Martha, God rest her soul, little Mikey in his dad's arms, an army compass that had saved his skin twice in the Da Nang tunnels, a roll of strong rope, not that cheap clothesline junk, but the real climber stuff, and the kicker, a worn-out notebook filled with notes on Viet Cong tunnel traps. "Sorry, Martha," he whispered, staring at his wife's picture, "but our boy's in a jam. And old tricks, they still work." Frank walked to the window. The full moon flooded the backyard with silvery light, tinning the tall grass into a Chernine sea, the perfect spot for what he had planned. The old soldier smiled, the same smile the enemy in the tunnels had seen right before they realized they'd walked into his trap. Chapter 2: English Lessons. When Chen first stepped into the Walsh household, Frank was wrapping up his daily perimeter sweep, a fascinating activity that involved crawling on all fours along the living room walls with a magnifying glass. In the old guy's mind, the enemy could sneak into the house through any crack, no matter how small. And the fact that the neighbor's cat regularly marked the corner of the house only backed up his suspicions. "That cat's a North Vietnamese spy, plain as day," Frank announced at breakfast. "I'm onto him. Everyone thinks he's just marking his turf, but he's really sending coded messages to the enemy. Yesterday I cracked one. It said, 'Sell Alaska back to the Russians.' Their thing had kicked off 2 months back at a dive called Joe's Joint, where Emily tutored Chinese students in English. Chun was 6 years younger, and that age gap only fueled the fire. First came innocent touches during class, then run-ins after hours, and then steamy dates in a motel on the edge of town. But pretty soon, meetings weren't enough. Emily was the one who floated the idea that sounded straight up loco: hold the lessons right at her place. The thought of being in the next room from her blind husband gave them a twisted buzz. "Oh, we got company?" Frank perked up when Emily yanked open the front door. "Hang on. Just gotta finish my report to the Pentagon. Comrade Cat sneezed 3 times to the east this morning. That's a clear signal to Chinese subs." He was sitting in front of an old toaster, using it like a radio. "Delta 1 Callan base. Repeat. Spy Cat is active. Need backup and 5 cans of tuna for counterintelligence. Over." Chun stood in the doorway, not knowing whether to laugh or bolt. Emily, smoothing her hair with a casual move, the one Chen already knew was their secret code, made the introductions. "This is Chun, my new student. Will be working here at the house. Chun, this is my husband's grandpa, Sergeant Frank Walsh, 3rd Platoon Tunnel Rats." The old man jumped to attention. 2 years in Da Nang, 15 confirmed. Oh, look, a helicopter. He dove to the floor and started blasting at the ceiling fan with a pencil. Everyone down. It's Charlie in a Huey. Mike, hearing the commotion, came out of his room. Gramps, you fightin' the fan again? It's not a fan, son. It's the newest Chinese tech. A stealth helicopter disguised as a household appliance. I figured it out when I saw it was spinning counterclockwise. Typical communist left-wing propaganda. Chen's gonna be coming 3 times a week, Emily said, trying to hide a smile. We figured it'd be easier to work at home. I know why, Frank piped up. Because we got a secret weapon against Chinese spies. My signature apple pie. Even General Vo Nguyen Jiap ran screaming from it. Though he did get a stomach ache later. But that's another story. Chun and Emily traded a glance that said relief. The old guy was so out there they had nothing to worry about. Nice to meet you. Mike stuck out a hand. Chun shook it, trying not to stare at the ex-Special Forces dude's dark glasses. We'll be in the living room, Emily announced. Gramps, maybe you could go to your room? Sure thing, sure thing. Frank nodded happily. Just gotta check if the enemies mind my favorite chair first. Felt kinda squishy yesterday. Either the springs are shot, or there's a squad of Viet Cong commandos hiding inside. Settling into his chair, the old guy started his usual act, snoring with a whistle, broken up by yells like, "No, Sergeant, that snake ain't edible." Or, "Who stashed a map of Ho Chi Minh City in my boots?" Emily and Chun sat at the table almost nose to nose. Their fingers accidental intertwined when they reached for the textbook. I want you, Chun breathed, looking her dead in the eyes. Almost, Emily whispered, but softer. Ambush. Frank suddenly roared, springing up in his chair. Enemy at 2 o'clock. No, 3 o'clock. Ah, hell. Someone set all the clocks to daylight savant time. He yanked a banana out of his robe pocket and started talking into it like a radio. All posts. We got code yellow. Repeat. Code yellow. And mighty tasty. By the way, just ate it for breakfast. That night, after eavesdropping on Emily's call with Chun, Frank went back to his room and pulled the roll of rope out of his rucksack. Sorry, Han, he whispered, gazing at his wife's photo. But it looks like we're gonna have a real guerrilla war in this house. And this time, my main ally ain't napalm, but good old-fashioned senility. He unfolded the house map, marked with red excess. In the corner was a note, Operation Toast and Dignity, code name picked by the toaster. He's our strategy guy. At the end of the day, like his old sergeant used to say, if you want to catch a rat, you need to think like one. And Frank was a master at that since his days in Da Nang, especially when he had his loyal toaster radio guy and a double agent cat on his side. Chapter 3, Security Systems. Attention, all posts. Frank's voice boomed all over the house. Initiating Operation Jingle Perimeter. Code name came from Private Toaster. He's head of public relations. It was 7 a.m., and the old-timer was in full command mode. This time, his army consisted of a dozen jingle bells, bought at the pet store, a spool of fishing line, and a huge collection of tin cans he'd been begging from the neighbors for 3 weeks. For a guerrilla orchestra, he'd explained with a wink. Gramps, what are you doing? Mike, waked up by the ruckus, came downstairs, holding onto the wall like usual. Setting up a defense perimeter, son. Frank was just attaching the first jingle bell over the kitchen door. See, in Vietnam we used a system like this. Oh, sorry, right, you can't see. But you'll hear soon. Each jingle bell's gonna have its own special sound. This one, for example, I'm calling morning hint of tea and biscuits. And the one by the back door, Midnight Serenade for Comrade Ho Chi Minh. Mike couldn't help but smile. And what's this musical security system for? Because the cat sent a coded message to the pigeons yesterday. I saw him meowing Morse code to him. 3 shorts, 2 longs. Frank kept chattering away, but his eyes were checking out the way Mike carefully moved through the hall, listening to the jingle bells. With each step, the grandson's movements got surer. He was starting to build a sound map of the house in his head. By noon, the security system was fully operational. Jingle bells hanging on every door, tripwires with little bells crisscrossing the halls, and tin cans strategically planted in the yard, sprinkled with a thin layer of dirt. "Comrade Cat," Frank yelled into the yard from the window. "Try getting through my perimeter now. No feline intelligence will go unnoticed." The neighbors were used to the crazy vet's antics and just shook their heads. Mrs. Johnson across the street had even started keeping a diary of his funniest sayings. "Today Frank accused my geraniums of spying for North Korea," she wrote that day. Said the red flowers were a clear sign of communist propaganda. That evening, Chun showed up for another lesson. Emily met him at the door, and they traded meaningful glances. "Breach in the perimeter," Frank roared from his observation post in his chair. "Spy Cat brought reinforcements." "It's just Chun, Gramps," Emily sighed. "Remember? My student." "Ah, yeah." Frank pretended to calm down, but kept muttering to himself. Sure, student. Yeah, I remember. We had a student in '69 too. Turns out he learned more of our secrets than English words." Mike was sitting in the living room, listening to music on headphones, or pretending to. Frank noticed his fingers tapping out a rhythm on the armrest, right in time with the jingle bells, as Emily and Chun walked by. The lovebirds settled at the table, supposedly lost in the textbook. But their hands under the table were touching more and more, and the laughter got more and more playful. They were so into each other that they didn't notice Mike take off his headphones. "I'll grab some water," Emily said, standing up. Chun trailed her to the kitchen. "Time for a system check," Frank suddenly announced, and wildly waved his arms, playing conductor. "Maestro Toaster, strike up the overture." He accidentally bumped one of the tripwires, and the house was filled with a whole symphony of jingles. At that moment, muffled laughter and the sound of breaking dishes floated from the kitchen. The lovers were clearly caught off guard. "Ah, how lovely!" Frank cheered. "The real music of the spheres. Too bad we don't have cymbals for the percussion section. Oh wait, sounds like something just broke in the kitchen." Late that night, when the house was quiet, Frank snuck into the yard with a shovel. It was time to start the main part of his plan. Under the light of the full moon, he started digging a hole, just like the ones that had saved his buddy's lives in Vietnam. "This is your English lesson," he mumbled, swinging the shovel. "We're learning a new word. Trap sounds different in Vietnamese, but the result's always the same." And in the house, Mike carefully took off his dark glasses and put his hand up to his eyes. In the dark, he could see a faint glow from the street light leaking through the curtains. It was the first light he'd seen in 8 months. But he was keeping this to himself for now. Something told him that Gramps' paranoia wasn't so crazy after all. Meanwhile, Frank kept digging, humming, "These boots are made for walking," and yelling orders to an imaginary platoon. "Private Shovel, dig deeper. Sergeant Rake, camouflage the position. Corporal Toaster, relay to base. Operation Hot Pit is a go. And yeah, I know you're still plugged in the kitchen, but we're in a combat zone here. Gotta be adaptable." The neighbor's cat was watching this scene from the fence, and Frank could swear he saw a flicker of approval in his yellow eyes. "What's up, Comrade Cat, switching sides. Good choice. We got tuna and a warm sock to sleep on. What those pigeons got. Just breadcrumbs and communist propaganda. Chapter 4. Suspicions. Chun didn't even flinch when Frank kicked off his usual morning radio broadcasts. The Chinese student had even started finned in, a certain charm in him, like a street performer's act that repeats every day on the same corner. Attention! This is Radio Free Toaster speaking. The old man blared into his banana microphone. Incident report for the last 24. Agent Cat has recruited 2 pigeons and 1 squirrel. The enemy's buildin' up manpower. Good mornin', Mr. Walsh. Chun greeted, walking into the kitchen. He didn't even knock, just walked in like he owned the place. Ah, our young friend. Frank squinted. Kinda early today. Lessons at 3, right? Emily asked me to come early. Chun smiled. Wanted to go over my homework. Yeah, right, Frank thought. Especially the part that gets done in the bedroom. The lovebirds had gotten shockingly careless over the past few weeks. They weren't even hidin' in the corners, but openly flirtin' right in front of blind Mike. Their lessons had turned into a twisted game. The closer they got to getting caught, the more it revved them up. You know, I had a fling with a Chinese woman when I was younger, Frank said out of nowhere, adjusting his banana microphone. Back in Saigon. Turns out she was working for North Vietnamese military intelligence. Trying to get our secrets through the sheets. Can you believe it? Chun choked on his coffee. Frank patted him on the back. Careful, son. Coffee's a tricky drink, especially when you're drinking it down the wrong pipe. At that moment, Emily walked into the kitchen in a light housecoat. Her hair was a little tousled, and there was a hickey on her neck she hadn't even bothered to cover up. Oh, Chen, you're already here. She walked to the fridge, accidentally bumping his hip. Attention, Frank bellowed again. Breach of personal space protocol. Comrade Toaster, log the time and coordinates. Gramps, for God's sake, Emily sighed. We're just gonna study. Sure, sure, the old guy nodded. But we were just studying in Da Nang too. And then boom, half the secret documents were in Hanoi. He limped to his chair in the living room, mumbling something about tactile intelligence and physical sabotage. But his sharp ears were catching every rustle, every muffled laugh coming from the kitchen. Mike came down a half-hour later. His moves were surer. He wasn't holding onto the walls, but smoothly navigating the tripwires and jingle bells Frank had strung up. Son, the old man cheered. Just in time. I'm working on a report for the Pentagon about suspicious activity in our house. Can you believe it? Someone ate all the cookies I left out to spy on the enemy. You ate 'em, Gramps, Mike smiled. Last night. Said the cookies might have been recruited by communist special ops. Ah, right? Frank smacked himself on the head. Had to take drastic measures. Destroyed the evidence. I mean, cookies with my own stomach. Just then, the sound of breaking dishes and muffled laughter floated from the kitchen. Frank noticed Mike's fingers clench on the armrest. What's going on in there? His grandson asked. Ah, it's our lovebirds. I mean, language students, studying, Frank drawled. A very intensive training program, especially in the area of oral practice. He made sure to say it loud enough for the lovers in the kitchen to hear. But they were so into each other that they didn't even notice the dig. That evening, after Chun finally left, after a particularly productive lesson that included some pretty clear sounds coming from Emily's office, Frank went to check on his main trap. The hole was almost ready, perfect depth, perfect slope, perfect camouflage of branches and leaves. What do you think, kitty? He said to the cat watching his work from the fence. Should we hold some training exercises? You can pretend to be an enemy spy, and I'll show off the effectiveness of our defense system." The cat sneered and turned away. "Ah, is that how it is?" Frank grinned. All right, I get it. You're an independent agent, workin' for your feline intelligence." Later that night, he overheard Emily's phone call. She wasn't even trying to talk quiet. She was so used to the safety that her husband's blindness and father-in-law's craziness gave her. "Yeah, baby, tomorrow like usual. This is getting me so hot." When he's sitting right there with his headphones on and "Yeah, I know it's awful, but ain't that the point?" Frank shook his head. He'd seen this before in Vietnam, how confidence leads to defeat. The enemy gets careless, drops their guard, starts making mistakes. He laid out his house map on the bed with red excess marking all the points of no return. Places where the lovers let themselves get too comfortable. The red excess were adding up. "Well," he mumbled, gazing out the window at his camouflaged hole. "Like my old sergeant used to say, the deeper the hole, the louder the echo when you fall. And you and me, baby hole, we got a couple more days to get even deeper." Chapter 5: The Trap. A storm was rolling into the city like a Viet Cong squad on an American camp, unstoppable and quiet. Frank was standing by the window, watching the heavy clouds close in. An old bucket by his feet gave off a weak smell of pee. "Comrade Toaster," he whispered to his trusty sidekick, "we're running Operation Wet Job today. And no, that ain't a pun. Though." He looked at the bucket and grinned. Frank had been demonstrating why refusing to use the bathroom for the last week, claiming he got used to peeing in a bucket in the bunker in Vietnam. "'Cause the gooks are walking around up there." Emily was fumine, but gave in, just another quirk of the crazy old man. Who knew it was part of the plan? Mike was in the living room, no headphones on. His dark glasses were on the table. He wasn't even trying to hide that he could tell the difference between light and dark. He could see the first lightning flashes through the big windows. "Gramps," he called softly. "You were right. All this time." Frank stopped playing the senile vet. His voice went hard, like back in the days when he was common in a squad in the tunnels. "How long you been knowin'? Saw him kissin' in the kitchen a week ago. Thought I was asleep." Mike clenched his fists. "Before that, just didn't want to believe it. Blamed it on paranoia. Mine, yours." "In Da Nang," Frank said slowly, like weighing every word. "We learned one simple truth. Paranoia ain't a disease. It's a survival mechanism." The first raindrops pounded on the roof. Something creaked upstairs. Emily was getting ready for her lover. She wasn't even trying to be quiet. She was so used to her husband's blindness and her father-in-law's craziness. "Today?" Mike asked. Frank nodded, holding the bucket tighter. "Today. You ready?" "Ready." The old man slowly went downstairs to the basement. The electrical panel flickered green in the dark, like fireflies in the jungle. For a second, Frank let himself tell one last joke. "So long, Comrade Toaster. You were a good soldier." Frank whispered, looking at the loyal sidekick. "It is time for your last mission. Operation Short Farewell begins." He set the toaster on the floor next to the electrical panel, plugged it in, and gave a salute. "It was an honor to serve with you. You are a brave soldier and a true friend. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." Then, in one move, he dumped the bucket right on the running toaster. There was a loud hiss, sparks flew, and, "Comrade Toaster, you're a true hero," Frank managed to whisper before the house went black. The short circuit blacked out the house. In the bedroom upstairs, Chon snapped away from Emily. They were getting it on without even closing the door. Who were they scared of? The blind husband downstairs. The crazy old man something in the basement. "Don't worry," Emily whispered. running her hand down his chest. Just the breakers. I'll go check. Sorry. Frank's voice came up from downstairs. A little Viet Cong-style sabotage. Technical difficulties. That was the last time they heard the old guy's jokey tone. I'll take a look. Chun started dressing. I'll grab some candles from the kitchen. In the pitch black, he slowly went down the stairs, holding onto the rail. The thunder outside was getting closer, and in a flash of lightning, he saw something that froze his blood. Mike was standing at the bottom of the stairs. No dark glasses. And his eyes were looking right at Chun. You know, the Special Forces dude's voice was calm, scary calm. When you lose one sense, the others get sharper. I heard every breath you took, every moan, every creak of the bed over my head. Chun backed up the stairs. Mike, I can explain. Explain. Mike's laugh had no fun in it. What exactly? How you were sleeping with my wife while I was sitting there with headphones on. How you made fun of the blind cripple. Or maybe, he took a step forward. You'll explain why you thought you'd walk out of here alive? Another lightning flash lit up the ex-Special Forces guy's face. And Chun saw in it what the Afghan fighters had seen in the last seconds of their lives. He turned and ran. The first tripwire caught him on the second floor. The jingle bells rang like a death knell. He got tangled in the fishing line, crashed to the floor, but jumped up and ran to the service stairs. Run! Mike's voice echoed in the dark. Run like your ancestors ran from my grandpa in the tunnels of Da Nang. Chun burst into the kitchen, knocking over a chair. He was shaken from fear and the understanding. All this month they'd been Logan at a crazy old man who was actually methodically set in a trap for him. Mike, please. Emily's scream came down from upstairs. Don't. Shut up. Her husband snarled with so much rage that she choked on the next words. Chun got to the back door, but the handle wouldn't budge. Locked. He ran to the window, tangled in the ropes Frank had strung up, tripping over cans. Every jingle, every crash gave away his position. How do you like the dark? Mike's voice was getting closer. Unsettling, ain't it? When you don't know what's one step away from you. When every sound can mean death. Chun finally got the window open. He tumbled out into the pouring rain. Lightning lit up the backyard, and he saw Frank standing on the porch with a cane. The old guy saluted him, a move with nothing funny in it. Holy shit! Chun roared as the ground dropped out from under him. He crashed into a perfectly camouflaged hole that were used by soldiers in jungles, and a shot of sharp pain shot through his leg. In the next lightning flash, he saw Mike leaning over the hole. Rain dripped down his face like tears. You know what's the worst thing? The Special Forces dude said in the same scary calm tone. Not that you were sleeping with my wife, but that you turned it into a game. A dirty game. Every time you did it in my house, thinking I couldn't see, it revved you up even more, right? Chun whined from the pain, cradling his broken leg. Emily was sobbing somewhere upstairs. Now listen close. Mike sat on the edge of the hole. You're leaving the country. For good. If I find out you stayed. If I see you anywhere near this house. He grinned. You know, Gramps taught me some tricks from Vietnam. Turns out his stories weren't so crazy after all. The storm raged over the house, like nature itself was clap-pinned for this drama. And in the basement, in a puddle of water, was a charred toaster, the only innocent victim of the night. A loyal soldier who died doing his last mission. Chapter 6, Old Tricks. The cops showed up 20 minutes after the neighbors called, hearing the screams. The soaked patrol officers found a weird scene. A Chinese student with a broken leg in a hole in the backyard. A crying woman on the porch. A blind Special Forces vet and his old man, who was trying to salute a burned-out toaster. Just an accident, Frank explained to the looking police. suddenly stopped playing the crazy old man. The young fella got lost in the dark. And the whole, old military habit. Those always helped in Vietnam. The detective on the scene was an Iraq vet. One look at the perfectly made trap, and he got it. His report included a line, "Accident due to adverse weather conditions." Chun was deported a week later. Something about his student visa suddenly got not quite right. Maybe it had something to do with that long talk between Frank and his old army buddy, who was working for the immigration service now. Emily left the day after the incident. She left a short note. "Sorry. I don't even deserve these words. But, sorry." The divorce was fast and quiet. No fights or lawsuits. She gave up all claims to property and disappeared somewhere on the West Coast. A month later, Mike and Frank sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Mike's eyesight was improving every day. Now he could see not just light and dark, but colors, the shape of things. Son, Frank turned his trusty banana in his hands, now using it like a microphone for real. "I gotta confess something, that you were never crazy?" Mike smiled. "I figured that out the night you pulled the short circuit. It was too precise." The old man grunted. "We were taught in Da Nang. The best disguise is the one the enemy believes. They thought I was nuts, and they let their guard down." "And the toaster?" Mike nodded at the brand new appliance, set tin peacefully on the kitchen windowsill. "Was that part of the act too?" "Don't be dumb," Frank snorted. "Private Toaster was a real hero. He died doing his duty. This rookie ain't nothing like him. Doesn't even toast bread even." They sat in quiet, watching the sun set. A car honked somewhere far away, and the sound didn't make Frank jump and yell "Air Raid" anymore. "You know what's the funniest thing?" the old man said out of nowhere. "All those tripwires, jingle bells, cans, I really used that stuff in Vietnam. Only it wasn't a game back then." Mike nodded. "You gonna tell me about it?" And Frank started telling. No lying, no pretend craziness. Just the stories of an old soldier who'd seen too much for one life. About the tunnels where the dark was so thick you could reach out and touch it. About learning to tell the difference between footsteps, rustles, the smallest movements of air. About the buddies who didn't come back, and the ones who came back different. A half-year later, they turned that hole into a pond. Mike joked that it was Frank's idea, rehabilitate the crime scene. The truth was the old man had always wanted to raise carp. "You'll see," he said, letting the first fish into the pond. "They'll be our new watchmen. A carp is a soldier too, only underwater." By that time, Mike was working at a rehab center for vets. His story about losing his sight and getting it back gave hope to others. But he never told the whole story. About the betrayal, about the revenge, about the hole in the backyard. Some stories are best left in the past. Every night, he and Gramps sat by the pond, fed the carp and talked. About war and peace, about loyalty and betrayal, about dark and light. Sometimes the cat joined them, that same cat Frank had accused of spying. "You know what I realized?" Frank said one day, watching the sun go down. "Old tricks work. Always. But the important thing ain't the tricks themselves, but why you use them." Mike looked at his grandpa. Now he could see every wrinkle on his face, every scar left by time and war.